So thank you, everyone, for this session. This is the future of data integration in the era of AI. My name is Carlos Erquino. I'm going to be the moderator today, and I'm excited to introduce two of our executives from Microsoft and DBT Labs, Faisal Mohamood, or Corporate Vice President of Data Integration for Microsoft Fabric, and also Tristan, the CEO and founder of DBT Labs.
Great to be here.
Nice to have you here, and
Yeah.
please a round of applause for them. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So, Faisal, let's start with you. How does Microsoft see this moment as an inflection point for data integration and not just another, technology cycle?
Yeah, it's a good question. One that I think many of us are thinking about. And as an industry, we have seen so many different technical shifts, right? And I think by and large, if we think about perhaps, one that, going back 10, 12 years, it was a big data movement, right? And there was, this shift of, and a shift that, in some sense impacted, let's say, analytics, data engineering, just, data in general and, and consumption scenarios of data. What's happening here with AI is it's impacting everybody. It's having a huge impact. Not, on any one practice, any one discipline, right? It's, I think, just going to impact us as a society in terms of productivity, and I think that's the big difference, right? And so, what that means for us in this data business, right, is, and for anyone building experiences as we are, I think, it's not just about an end user, a human, consuming the data. It's also AI and agents, and I think that changes, what data integration will have to support. And I think from a requirement standpoint, we now have to think about, well, how do we bake that in? How do we think about that fitting into sort of the story? Because our ability to now leverage AI will depend on it.
Right. And Tristan, from the DBT Labs perspective, what do you think has fundamentally changed about data integration in the era of AI?
So you asked a kind of bigger historical question before, and
Yes.
maybe I'll pivot from that and go into this.
Absolutely.
But it just, we have, as an industry, tracked over, 30 years of history, on-prem data appliances and, drag and drop. And there have been many religious battles fought along the way, SQL versus NoSQL, all of these different things. And, people in the industry love to talk about their battle scars and about how every time there's a change, it's just going to be the whole same cycle again. And like, oh, I saw this when people said that SQL was dead. But I really do think that over the last 10 years, we are on a trajectory that is not cyclical. Like, we moved from on-prem and thinking about resource allocation and hardware management and all this stuff to an era of the cloud and elasticity. And you could start to think, and this is where DBT got our start with, when you move to the cloud, you can, kind of abstract away all of the complex data infrastructure. You can just start thinking about how do you declare your intent behind what you're trying to get done. And now, you with AI, you take that again another step further, and you have to reimagine like what the job to be done is for every human who participates in the process. And it's a topic that we could talk about for a very long time. But my belief is that everybody who's involved in data is moving up the stack. They're the job is fire yourself from all of the previous jobs that you did, hire agents to do those things, and then go up a level. So we're trying to help make that happen. But it's still in early stages.
And on that point, right, that AI is changing, everything, agents are happening from looking ahead at the next 3 to 5 years. How do you think data integration will be different on that perspective?
3 to 5. How about
Or
12 to 24 months? I don't know. I mean,
okay, let's go with that. Yes.
I think that if you're in the cloud, if you're already thinking about data integration as software engineering, where you're like building production systems and you're using code and modern development best practices, then the big shift that will happen is that most of the creators of the pipelines will move from humans to agents, and the job of the humans will be to build harnesses and quality infrastructure, and like how do you give the agents an environment where they can do the work that they need to do appropriately and you can trust them, and then the job of the analysts on the other end. So you've got producers and consumers of data. The job of the analysts is going to move from taking questions from business users and translating them into SQL and then translating the results back to how do I make sure that I have my semantic context specified for the agents in a way that they can understand it, so that the business users can interact directly with agentic systems.
No, love it. And then, Faisal, on that point, like, how do you see Microsoft Fabric aligning that to that future state of data integration?
Yeah, I think I think about this a lot because I think things have been happening so quickly, so fast, that there's been a tendency, I think, to say, well, there's going to be lots of disruption, and certainly there will be lots of disruption, and and at the same time, I don't think we should, and this is my point of view, we should confuse all of that disruptive capability with sort of the sentiment that all of the things that we have known to be true and known to be good and are useful and important, that gets thrown out the window, right? I think this is really, really important. And I think we confuse sometimes this notion of I can go from 0 to 100 so quickly as a POC. And that doesn't mean, the layers of governance and the layers of trust and the layers of, capability that we have built over time are just going to go away, right? Or are meaningless. In fact, I think they become even more important.
I got very irritated at a blog post I read recently that said ETL is dead. And I'm just like, that doesn't represent a real knowledge of like how context windows work or memory or any of it. Like ETL is not going anywhere.
You still have to, I think the problems remain. I think, the fact, is now, I think going back to my previous point, you're going to have autonomous agents and, guess what? I think they still need the capability. And a lot of times if you want compliance, if you want trust, if you want, governance, I think the constructs that we have and the layers that we have built all the way up through to perhaps the user experience need to stay, right? And now we have to, of course, evolve them to meet the needs of, the times. But, I'd say that's one point. And then, if we then sort of look at, going back to the question of fabric, I think what's, also been happening in the industry and, OneLake's, I think, an approach certainly solidified, it's an open lake, right? Interop is really important. The ability to get data in, the ability to get data out, the value of, having not just a data layer, but a semantic layer, all of these things matter, right? And so, I'd say it's that, capability set. It's the fact that, we have governance and security and trust, built in. And, I think that will be even more important. And now we just have to ensure that what agents are doing also remain compliant.
Yes, and we were talking about, we already have customers using DBT Labs, but also we have customers using Fabric. How this collaboration and partnership is opening up a set of a new stage of, open end-to-end data platforms, and how should, customers should be looking at that?
Yeah, you want me to start? I can, jump in. I think, when we started Fabric, we had lots of customers telling us, They love DBT, as an approach, as a capability for the transformation layer, and they've already standardized on it, perhaps standardized on it. And that was, very much, I would say, harmonious with what we were trying to do with Fabric and data integration, which was, the end of the day, customers king. It's all about choice. It's all about choice. It's all about open. DBT certainly paved the way with sort of bringing, the first principles, of software development lifecycle to, combine that with, sort of a SQL-like, approach that a vast set of, developers in our industry understand, and, essentially provided for ELT, and now, as these lake-centric architectures, are mainstream. It's a great fit, right? And so I think that was important for us to say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of transformation capability you want to use against OneLake, against, against, the data that sits in Fabric. And by the way, if you want to run DBT on, on Databricks, on Snowflake, they all have adapters. It's all good. It's so I think that openness and choice is how we thought about it. And, when we approached Tristan and team and said, hey, let's, work together, couldn't have thought of found a better partner.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. From our perspective, like, I never set out to build a tool that was they could address every single data transformation use case. That was not, if you want something that is general purpose and kind of unopinionated, use Python, or you like, and that's fine. I had been in the data industry for a long time, and there were very specific ideas I had on how I felt like the workflow should happen. And so DBT has been molded to say, like, we're going to make doing data transformation really, really idiomatic, really seamless if you adopt this mental model of the world. And at the outset, I didn't, I thought that might be a few hundred people. Now it's a few million people, and that's really cool. But we never try to advocate that, like, DBT is the only hammer for every nail. And in the same way that you were just talking about, I think that as the workloads that we need to run on top of our data expand beyond analytics into AI, there are going to be more engines, and every database makes trade-offs. And so there will be, kind of local options like a DuckDB that has really interesting properties. There will be, databases like ClickHouse. These are like new types of architectures that are really interesting, and we want DBT to be kind of an abstraction layer that people can think across all of them.
On this topic of customers, right? There's something that customers are always asking, at least me. It's like, what does this AI-ready data really mean? And what are those considerations we need to have from the data integration perspective? Maybe Faisal, you have a point of view there?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the some of the principles that I was stating earlier, right? Which is, I think you've got to look at agents and agentic automation, much in the way you would think of I think the point I was making earlier, which is, the things that we know, to be true and to be good don't disappear, right? And I think, if anything, it becomes even more important. The notion of metadata, the notion of catalogs, the notion of, having quality, at the core when it comes to the data products that, are either being used or being created for further downstream consumption. Those things all remain true. And, what changes, I think, again, is how you get at it, and, and the velocity and the productivity that becomes possible. And, with that, I think, as we pursue speed, right? As we pursue speed, and really important for us to think of, perhaps time to, insight, or time to, XYZ as, as an outcome. There are many, many different outcomes. You still have to be, I think, thinking about what are the outcomes that I want, but then don't, run so fast that you're no longer in control. I think that that becomes important. And so the foundation, right? The foundation, the architecture, the controls for compliance and trust, all are just as important, if not more important.
My take on this is that data that was ready for analytics is also generally ready for AI. Now that's both good and bad because a lot of data wasn't really that ready for analytics. I mean, like never really got there. But the thing that the like big project that we have to go through is not to do some dramatically different thing with our data. It's to do a really dramatically different thing with our context. And it used to be good enough to have context kind of located all over the place, including like I know a guy in finance who knows a thing and has a spreadsheet, and like it's like not good enough in a world of agents. You have to be just as systematic about how context is stored and surfaced to agents as you are about your Kimball third normal form about the modeling of the underlying data.
So what I'm hearing is like now semantic in that context and the metadata is becoming much more important, correct?
I think so, and we have, and the industry has been talking about semantics for a long time, but historically that has meant some kind of like very constricted definition of like what does semantics mean, and now sometimes it literally just means like talk out loud to me and I'll record it in a markdown file, and that's good enough. And so I think that the definition of like what is semantics is iterating very, very quickly.
And for the data leaders, or perhaps on that topic, right? For the data leaders watching this, what's the most important mind shift, right, that they should start having this year and on moving forward for the era of AI?
I would say the big mind shift, and this is not just for data leaders, right? This is for, I think anyone in the industry, certainly in our, certainly in any line of work. Let me just start with, sort of the tech, practitioners and, and those that, are listening to, this type of a talk and, in the business of, data and the business of, enabling our, any business, right? I think is, one, the mindset is this is happening. It's happening, right? And, I think we got to figure out how are we going to get on, board with, with the change that's happening. And what does it mean for all of the things that I'm doing right today? Don't be terrified of the fact that, everything that I've built up until today or the things that I've, established as practices, as, architectural approaches, those things go away, right? But at the same time, I think, the thing that will be important to keep in mind is how do you 10x? I'm just throwing out a number, right? And nobody knows what, I think it's all up to us to figure out how fast we're going to be able to move. But I think that mindset of saying we gotta, go 10x, faster, I think is important. And I think it starts with that.
My big guidance for anybody at any level of an organization is find ways to get your hands on the technology yourself. Maybe this is not the right thing to say on this particular stage, but my very first experience with a cloud data warehouse was with Amazon Redshift in 2015. And I had like this moment where I was just like, oh my God, this is not like the world is not going backwards from this. We're only going forwards. And I would not have had that moment if I was not hands-on with the technology. And I think that many of us, myself included, have had that moment in the last 3-4 months with agents. Like there's something working that wasn't working before. And it is not, I don't think it is the right time to spend all of your free time reading blog posts and HBS articles. And like, it is the right time to be trying this out yourself and building the intuitions, whether you're an IC or a CEO.
Good. As we're closing this fireside chat, Faisal, you mentioned something that there's a lot of pressure, right? Like getting into AI, it's going so fast. What would you recommend, leaders and the practitioners and everyone here to start thinking, like, how should they approach this pressure that it's kind of being felt, right? They've been felt as we're approaching and getting into AI projects.
I think there's been a lot of fear about jobs going away, and what does it mean for me, and are we all depending on our line of work, is this thing going to make us irrelevant in a certain line of profession, certain line of work, right? I would say I think this is a great, again, going back to that mindset shift, if we can look at this as, how can this be an accelerant for my career? How can I, essentially, become a superhero of sorts, and I think it goes back to what Tristan was saying as well. There's a moment of revelation that happens when you just put this, to use in whatever context, right? No pun intended. And I think that's step number one. Let go of the fear, and I think of it as an advantage. That something that can be harnessed, and be among the first, right? To run ahead.
And I sometimes we get, all of us, myself included, get lost in these bigger conversations about like, well, where is this taking us over the course of a and like literally nobody knows the answers to that stuff. And I think that sometimes it is a way for each of us individually to not jump in. But the truth is, it's fun. Like if you just get guided by your own sense of like fun and curiosity, you will be fine. Like you will find a way.
No, I love this because even as I think every single team in Microsoft is using and see how we integrate, agentic and AI and Copilot everywhere to actually transform what we do and be much more productive. But thank you for the conversation. I learned a lot. Again, thank you again for the partnership, and to everyone, visiting us in FabCon Atlanta. The DBT Boot Labs is just next door, so please go. And for the people listening to us online, there's going to be a QR code coming up soon about the private preview of DBT Fusion in Fabric. So if everyone's started to sign up, please sign up for that QR code. And with that, thank you. And thank you, Faisal. Thank you, Tristan. This has been an amazing conversation.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
What a conversation. Everything you've been watching here was captured live at FabCon and SQLCon in Atlanta, from the interviews to the demos to the community insights that make these events so special. If you're into Microsoft Fabric, SQL, and the future of data, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And speaking of next, we're taking this show to Barcelona. FabCon and SQLCon Barcelona are happening this September 2026, and it's going to be packed with big announcements, deep technical sessions, and one amazing global data community. Hit the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to register and use code FABTV to save €200 off your ticket. As always, thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and we'll see you in the next one.